Hey everyone, welcome to the Blue Collar Enlightenment Show. It's your host, Jonah. Today, we're talking with Mindy Tautfest. Mindy is the state director for the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, and a former ICU nurse. In 2016, Mindy suffered a medical emergency of her own, which we will talk about later in the show. But first, how are you, Mindy?
I'm doing great, Jonah. Thanks for having me today.
Of course. It's an honor to have you on the show.
It's an honor to be here. I'm telling you, I've had the best time getting to know you and talk to you here.
It seems like every time we're on the phone, we're talking about for 2.5 hours or so.
Absolutely.
And every time you bring something new, it's crazy. Today, we're just going to start off with the basics, get to know you a little bit. So first, I want to know, how did you get into investigating UFOs and UAPs?
Well, that is a long, drawn-out answer, and I will try to shorten it down for you some. I've always been really interested in the paranormal ever since I was real little. In fact, I remember whenever I was 7 or 8, around that age, they had a Looney Tunes show that came out called Quackbusters, and they were investigating paranormal phenomena. And I remember being so taken with this. I wondered, how could I do this, for a living if that was a real profession? And, I kind of grew into that. I grew up in a house that was haunted. And so I encountered a lot of haunting activity along the way. Never did experience a UFO, but that was always really my main interest was in ufology. And I really followed it. I would go down to the bookmobile and check out books when I was a kid about UFOs. And I've always just been really interested in the phenomena. So it's only natural that I ended up being where I am today.
It seems like once you kind of dig yourself into it, it kind of takes interest because you don't know what it is and you can't explain it.
Yeah.
You landed the state director role. Can you tell me how you came to get that title?
Yeah, I actually, in 2016 is whenever I had a brain aneurysm, and it took a couple of years of recovery. And once I was kind of back on my feet, my husband decided that it was time to take me to Roswell. I had always wanted to go, and he knew it. And so he scraped up the funds, and we headed out to Roswell, took our 2 kids, and we had a really good time. At the time, they were having the big annual festival that celebrates the crash that happens every July, that they hold the festival. And so we went out there, and I ended up meeting Kathleen Martin. And she is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. And at the time, she was leading the MUFON Experiencer Resource Team. And in talking with her, I got really interested in MUFON. I had heard about it before. I actually had looked into becoming a field investigator with them a few years prior, but I just didn't think that they would use someone like me. I wasn't in law enforcement. I didn't have any military background. And I really didn't think that there was anything that I could offer the organization. So I kind of talked myself out of it. But on the way home from Roswell, I was talking with my husband, and we had a long car ride. So I was looking up information about MUFON on the way home. And I ended up reaching out to the state director that was listed on the website. And contacted her, and she said, well, there's really not an Oklahoma MUFON now. I've kind of stepped down from that position due to health concerns, and you'll need to get a hold of headquarters. So I reached out again and got a hold of Doug Wilson, who is our director of investigations. And Doug ended up staying on the phone with me for a good 3 hours and explaining everything about MUFON and how I could become an investigator. And he was so patient with me. I know the man has gone through this hundreds of times talking to people, and he is so patient. But he did. He answered all my questions. And he said, look, if you want to get MUFON up and going in Oklahoma, I'll work with you and we'll get it built up. And so that's exactly what we did. I trained under him to become a field investigator. And then after about a year of working as a field investigator, I was assigned the duty of being state director. So that's how I ended up in this position.
So how many people are there in the MUFON organization?
Well, across the world, there's thousands that are members. We've got chapters in all different countries, every state across the U.S., and it's an all-volunteer organization. So we investigate every case that comes in that's reported to MUFON through our database. And we have about 400 to 500 field investigators that actively do the investigations. So MUFON, it's the oldest and largest UFO investigative organization in the world.
So how do these people become investigators through MUFON?
Well, it's a bit of a process. You have to become a MUFON member, obviously. And once you have an annual membership, then you can speak to your state director. And we like to get to kind of know people that are interested in being field investigators. We do work as a team within the different states. And so we like to know that someone is going to be a good fit with us. Also, you have to pass a background check. So if you have a criminal record, you will not be accepted. And once you kind of go through those hurdles, then you'll have to purchase the Field Investigator Manual through our website. And this manual covers everything that you could come across within a investigation into the unknown. We investigate orb sightings that are related to UFOs, crop circles, cattle mutilations, how to deal with the media, the chain of command, how to take samples, how to determine where planets were during the night sky whenever a report was made. So it's going to cover a whole plethora of things that we're going to need in our tool bag whenever we do an investigation. So once you have covered the manual, you'll take an exam. It's a 100-question exam. You have to pass with at least an 80, and you have 3 attempts to make it through that exam. And if you're able to do that, then you are a field investigator trainee. You have to sign some non-disclosures and stuff like that to make sure that we're not sharing information about any witnesses. And that's about it. Then you start training under the local leadership there within your state.
Okay, so during these investigations, what are kind of some of the things that you're looking for? Say you walk up on a crop circle, or you'll see your sightings, or a report will come in of a sighting. Or say one of your investigators sees something and they record it and it comes back to you. So what are you looking for during an investigation?
Well, it kind of depends on the case itself. So we break up cases into 3 different categories. We have, simply put, they're category 1, 2, or 3s. Category 1s are going to be simple flyby sightings, where someone said, hey, I was outside and I saw this green light and it flew from west to east over me and it lasted for 4 seconds. Well, for that kind of a report, we are not going to do a site visit. We're not going to come interview you face to face. Most of that work is going to be done online or over the phone. And so as a field investigator, whenever we get a case in, that's a simple flyby case, category 1, we'll start immediately looking at the weather information. We will collect information about the planetary positions during that time, where certain stars were. We will look at if there were any meteor reports. We will look at Flight Radar 24 to see if there were any airplanes or helicopters or even balloons in the area that are registered on the map. And we'll also look for positions of satellites that are known. And so we start formulating what exactly was happening in the night sky during that sighting. And that's how we're able to kind of narrow down what we could explain. If we're able to explain something, then we want to be able to do that. So we can narrow it down to the truly unexplained events. Category 2 cases, we are going to have some kind of trace evidence, possibly. Could be in close proximity to the witness. And so we might see singeing at the top of trees. It could be, hovering at treetop level. And so we're looking at the branches, trying to see if something has left any trace there. We're not going to go out on every category 2 case, but it's kind of up to our discretion. If we think there could be something there, then we'll go. And then the category 3 cases are the ones where there's a landing, an abduction, or an entity that has been encountered. And we're going to go out on all of those that are current. Sometimes we get reports of, hey, back in 1983, this happened, and there's really nothing for us to go investigate on site. But if it's a current case that, hey, yesterday, I woke up and I have these indents on my skin and this and that, we're going to go out and we're going to try and collect any kind of evidence that we can. As far as evidence, it's going to depend on what kind of case it was. I've had cases where I was out in the field collecting different types of rocks because I was told that a craft had ejected rocks from the surface of it. And so I was out in the debris field of all these rocks and picking up those and getting those sent off to our lab. There's been ones where I collected drywall. I've collected some substance off of cars. It ended up being pond scum. And so it's just really kind of dependent on each of the cases and what we're presented with as far as what we're looking for and what kind of things we collect. Now, MUFON does have its own lab, and it's located out in Missouri. And they're working right now to fully fund it and get our lab analysts some more equipment out there. But anything that we collect does get analyzed through our lab there in Missouri.
So what's one of the most ridiculous, I can't believe they sent it to us, reports that you've came across?
Well, I was thinking about this. We really don't get much. You would think that we would get more hoaxes, but really I've not come across that. I've only had one case that I've had to label as a hoax, and it was what we categorize as a hoax keystroke. So this wasn't one where someone has gone out and, set up a model and filmed it. They're out there flying a drone and trying to fool us. It was more a hoax keystroke is where someone has made up a tale. In the case of the report that I had received, it wasn't even so much that the person had made up a tale. They were complaining. They put their name down as shame on you. And they were upset because we weren't sharing intimate details about abduction cases. And there's a line where we will not share information because it is personal to the abductee. And a lot of times we're dealing with a event that may have been traumatic to the person. And so if they've come to us in confidence to share what's happening with them or has happened to them, then we are not going to go and just automatically share that with the public. We do share certain aspects of it. We'll let people know that there was an abduction that happened from this location, as far as the city, but we're not going to give anything that is going to identify who it was or particulars to their case.
Okay, I got you. Something that's exciting that we have talked about. So what's the most compelling thing that you've come across as your time as director and as a investigator?
I'll tell you what, Jonah, I'm excited to announce this. I have researched about 100 cases here in Oklahoma over the last few years. And this last year, I came across a case that is just fantastic. It is going to be presented this year at the MUFON Symposium in Denver, July 7th through the 10th. And it will be announced as one of the top 5 cases of interest for the year. And this case, it involves school children at a boarding school out in eastern Oklahoma in 1975. And it kind of harkens back to some of the other big schoolyard sightings that are quite famous, as far as one that happened in Australia and then one that happened in Zimbabwe. Both of those got quite a bit of media attention because of the number of witnesses and then the number of kids that really were there to see what had taken place. In the case of this one here in Oklahoma, it was completely unknown until this last year. And I'm so excited that they decided to come forward. And each of the different witnesses that I've spoke to all have vivid memories about what exactly transpired there at the school. And it's really interesting to see how much, even 30 years later, how much their memories line up. And they had not spoken with each other. In total, there were 15 different witnesses that were there. One was a teacher, and she was the only adult that's still with us that could verify. But she wrote a very in-depth account of what she remembers from that. And her memories are much more in-depth even than the children. She claims that this encounter went on throughout the night and even some into the next following days. So it'll be really interesting to be able to share that one in full and finally just let the world know about this amazing encounter that took place here in Oklahoma. I think until now, we've kind of not been on the map at all as far as ufology. You wouldn't think of UFOs when you think of Oklahoma, but I think that this is going to be a case where when Oklahoma is mentioned, people are going to immediately think of this case.
That's exciting. I'm going to try to live stream that so I can be there to listen to that. There's been speculation and these things about fairies and how they're involved with UFOs and all this coming around. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, fairies. That was not something I was prepared for.
Yeah, I wasn't either until you told me, and I was like, what? Fairies?
Yeah, that was kind of my initial reaction too. And I try to keep an open mind. I've encountered enough things in my life to know that there are things out there that I can't explain and that there's always something more than what I'm expecting. And that's exactly what happened with the fairies. Back whenever I was first starting investigating, I had come across a witness who had several encounters. He had taken several pictures. And one of the things he sent me was a picture of a fairy. And it was kind of glowing green. It was underneath a light. And it was here in Oklahoma. And I thought, okay, I kind of shrugged it off, but kept an open mind about it nonetheless. And not long after that, I had another witness here in Oklahoma saying, well, I've had these UFO sightings, and then don't think I'm crazy, but I've also been seeing these fairies. And it was her and her husband. They were in Midwest City, Oklahoma. And they drew pictures and sent them to me of what they had been witnessing. And they described them, they called them mimics, was their word for them. I don't know why. They didn't know why they called them this, but that's what they kind of referred to them as. But as it went along, I kept getting more and more of these fairy reports. And come to find out, I was speaking with the assistant state director of MUFON for Missouri. Her name is Margie Kay. And Margie was actually writing a book on winged creature sightings. And so she had already, unbeknownst to me, been collecting all of these reports of fairies and of larger winged creatures such as Mothman around the Missouri area and Oklahoma. And so whenever we were speaking, she said, I have got to talk to these people. So she reached out to them. And the couple there in Midwest City has always been very open to sharing their experiences and keeping me up to date with what was the latest sightings for them. And so she came down and actually visited with them and interviewed them face to face about some of the fairy sightings that they were having. And most recently, this last year, I received another case from a respected military man. He had reported seeing 2 triangle UFOs in a town just east of Oklahoma City. And he had seen the 2 triangle UFOs with his cousin, and they were hovering. And then he included in his report that off to the left, he looked and there was a fairy. And when I read that, I said, oh, it's still going on. So I contacted him, and he felt silly including that information about the fairy. He said, I almost left it off because I have tried to talk to people about this triangle sighting before, This had happened a few years back. He said his friends in the military kind of made fun of him about it, kind of laughed it off. And so he didn't think anyone would really take him seriously as far as the UFOs, let alone throwing in a fairy sighting. But funny enough, that's what kind of captured my attention and brought more credibility to his case, even though it was already a credible witness. But the fact that he included that, and I knew it was something that was happening here, it just really kind of served to confirm the truth behind his story.
So, did he kind of go into detail of what he thought they were? Maybe it's like a little, I don't know, like a drone that they sent down to do reconnaissance or something?
No, he did not feel it was anything like that. I know that there's little drones that are about the size of insects that people, say can fly around and monitor us and whatnot. He didn't get that kind of impression at all. In fact, he described it as looking somewhat like a nebula, and he didn't think that it was a fully solid thing. So his cousin had seen it. He reported it as a fairy. The man that reported it to MUFON, he wasn't so sure. He knew it was some kind of a winged something, but it wasn't even completely solid from what he had witnessed.
What are your views on UFOs, and what do you think they are? Where do they come from?
Well, that's a whole new can of worms there.
Yeah, that's a interesting subject, because you're in that world on a daily basis, and so you probably hear so many different, aspects of it and terminology and whether what the speculation is. So
yeah, I think that something's going on. I think if anyone tells you that they know what they are, then they're not being fully honest. We have not had enough information brought to the forefront to fully be able to determine what exactly we're dealing with here. We know that the military continues to be interested in it. We know that our government continues to be interested in it. Something is happening in our skies, and we don't have an explanation for it. We don't necessarily have all of the technology that seems almost magical at times to be able to produce what people are seeing and encountering. I think that it's interesting that the government has renewed their interest publicly recently with the development of the office there within the federal government to investigate UFOs. And it's interesting, some of the language on there sounds awful lot like what MUFON's been put in place. They may have taken a few pointers from us, but I think it's interesting to see that they're doing this now, and it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. In the beginning, when they were first talking about it this last year, some of the language kind of harkened back to what we were seeing back in the 1940s with our Project Grudge, Project Blue Book. And, we don't know what it is, but they could be a national security threat. I think that it would be irresponsible for them to dismiss the idea of it being a national security threat. But we also see that these things are interacting with some of our nukes, like what happened there at Maelstrom and at other places where they've shut down our nuclear capabilities. And so I think that we should keep an open mind that it could be a threat, but I also don't think that we should play into that fear, because they have had these capabilities for a lot longer than we've been admitting it. And I think that personally, I think that what it's pointing to is that they are trying to keep us from doing ourselves in. They're not setting off the nukes, they're shutting them down.
Yeah. And they did that same thing in Russia, did they not?
Yeah, I was seeing some kind of reports about that from the Ukraine.
Yeah, they were shutting them down out there, and then they were in a frenzy. But I've done research on UFOs and stuff like that, and I've seen that the four corners, I guess, is that what they call it? Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, that area where they did a lot of nuclear testing. There's a lot of sightings in that area, and it kind of brings to mind that the nuclear testing that we're doing, maybe that's attracting whatever's coming to visit us, whatever it be.
Right. And it makes you wonder where they're originating from. If they're coming from another planet, are they trying to protect our planet here? Are they coming from inside our planet? Then they would have a much bigger role, a much bigger interest in what's happening on the surface if they're within our Earth. There's several different theories of where these things could be coming from. Some people think that's from the future. Some people think that it's from another dimension. As far as MUFON, they don't have, one set idea of what it could be, but we consider all of them. And that's kind of how I am as well. I don't like limiting myself and going, well, it doesn't fit into my preconceived notion of what I think it is, so this can't be true. You try to just see where the evidence points you and then kind of narrow things down. And we're just at the very beginning of that whole process.
Yeah, you can only speculate of what you can see, until we actually know, then we'll know. Mm-hmm. And that will be one of the most enlightening moments mankind has ever had, I think.
Absolutely.
Whenever that comes out. So what percentage of UFO sightings do you think are like confirmed, unidentified phenomenons?
That's interesting. If you check the MUFON website, there's a little tag that I put at the end of my emails, which you might have read or not. And it says, as field investigators, our job is to identify the things that we can identify and then narrow it down to the things that are truly unexplained so that we can further study those in more detail. So we want to get rid of all these false positives. According to MUFON before, we could identify 90 to 95% of things, which leaves, 5 to 10% that are unexplained. The interesting thing is that my chief investigator, his name is Michael Dickerson, he is wonderful with statistics, and he really thrives just getting in there and looking at all the numbers and crunching. And so he's been looking at some of the numbers, and we don't have a 90 to 95% identification rate. We're seeing more 60 to 70% on a good day. And so that's interesting in the light of the fact that we now have the entire internet at our fingertips. We should be able to go in and be able to identify things positively. If it's Venus, I should be able to look and see, okay, that's definitely Venus, and we can rule that out. We're not finding that. Instead, we're finding that we're ruling out all these things, and there are more things that we're not able to identify than what we were able to identify several years back. So this may be pointing to an uptick in sightings that are true unexplained sightings, or it could be pointing to lazy, FI work. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it's an interesting trend that we're seeing, and we're kind of keeping an eye on right now to kind of see what that's pointing to.
Okay. So there's a man we were talking about, and he has this thing called MADAR. Can you explain that to me and my listeners?
Yes. MADAR was actually created by a gentleman named Fran Ridge. And from what I understand, he's a genius in his own right. He has put together this unit that will measure compass readings. It'll measure geomagnetic readings. It'll measure for spikes in barometric pressure. And there's so many different things that it does. MADAR, I can't remember what exactly it stands for. It's something magnetic anomaly detection and something. But the gist of it is that different people can buy these MADAR units. I think they're a couple $100. You can go through the website and purchase one, and it just plugs into your computer. And each MADAR unit, you can buy an alarm to go on it, and it'll alarm and wake you up from a dead sleep if you want to be. So these MADAR units, they'll alert if there's any kind of a large spike in geomagnetism that it detects. And he is trying to work with MUFON, or he has historically worked with MUFON in a project called Project Match. And he's trying to match up these alerts from the MADAR nodes all across the U.S. to UFO sightings that have come in to MUFON to see if there's any kind of correlation. Because what he's trying to do is to identify any kind of readings that we can get at the time that these things materialize or that they fly over or whatever, that we could actually pinpoint to a UFO sighting. So it's kind of an experimental thing right now, but it's really interesting the work that he's doing over there. I think here in Oklahoma, we have about 3 different nodes. We've got one up in Tulsa. We've got one here east of Oklahoma City and one just a bit north. And so we're looking to get more here. The more nodes that we have set up, the more information that we'll be able to gather. And what they're doing right now is they're trying to find if they can track a UFO flying across the U.S.
Oh,
so
that'd
if
be awesome.
it happens to alarm in Missouri, and then it alarms here in Oklahoma, and then we get one over in Colorado, and we have 3 different UFO reports of the same object, then we can line it up.
Has he got any so far?
Has he got any matches?
Yeah.
Absolutely. He gets matches all the time.
Really?
It's not every single sighting that matches, but there are several that he's been able to pinpoint that, this node went off and we have this sighting here. And one of the interesting things here in Oklahoma is in December, we had an alert at my chief investigator's home. And it went off at about 5:26 in the morning, I believe. And so he was actually up drinking his morning coffee, stepped outside to see what it was, see if he could see anything, identify anything. And he sees a couple of flashes in the northern sky. So he comes in and he texts me, "Hey, I got an alert and I just had a sighting of something." Well, this man, he was a military policeman. He has never had a UFO sighting before in his life. And so he was excited to have seen something. So whenever he got that sighting, he went ahead and filed a report with MUFON. I investigated the case like I would any other case. I try not to have any kind of bias because he's my chief investigator. I want to see if we can identify it. And if we can, then we can rule it out. But going through, there was a couple of satellites that were flying through the sky, and they were in the wrong portion of the sky. He was looking north. There were some that were south of him, and they were traveling in the wrong direction. So I was able to rule those out as a source. I ended up sending him a video of something known as flash bulbs. And these are seen in conjunction with something called CE5, which is where people meditate and try to draw in UFOs to communicate with them. And a lot of times they will get responses in the form of these flash bulbs, where it's just a single flash in the sky. And whenever I sent this video to my chief investigator, he immediately identified that that's what he had seen. So here he is. This node is going off because there's been a major spike in geomagnetism. The compass has changed direction to some degree, and he's seeing these couple of flash bulbs in the sky that is typically associated with some kind of UFO sighting. So we have a correlation there that's pretty interesting, and then we're keeping an eye on it.
And you said a guy was meditating, trying to draw in UFOs.
Well, my investigator was one. He is not the type to go out there and try to meditate and contact UFOs. CE5, it is, or some people call it HICE, which is HICE, Human Initiated Contact Experience. And you can look this up. There is like a whole protocol that people will do. Sometimes people will send out certain tones to the sky to try to signal in. Some people will get out there with a laser pointer, which I would not recommend if you live in the city. You shine that at an aircraft and you can get in major trouble for that. But some people will go out into the desert or whatever and signal with their laser pointers. And most of the time it does involve some kind of a meditation to try to make contact with them in a consciousness sort of fashion, and invite them in to come and show themselves. And people will get these flashbulbs that appear in the sky.
Huh. So would that play any correlation with astral projection?
It could. I think whenever you're talking about astral projection and CE5, the underlying thread there is consciousness. And recently we've seen a lot of investigation into consciousness. And the military was looking into this back in the 60s and 70s. You see with the men who stare at goats, where they were trying to stare at goats and explode their heart, or they were trying to walk through walls by changing their consciousness. There's an underlying thread of consciousness between all of these different things. In fact, there was a program with the Army that was called the Gateway Process. That it was actually called the Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process. And they were trying to have soldiers meditate into sending their consciousness into another reality to make contact with non-human intelligences. And so our military has had a long history of looking into how to manipulate consciousness and what this means as far as contact. So the CE5 initiative really is not that big of a change from what we were seeing them do back in the 70s.
Right. And I believe that kind of has some kind of correlation with MK Ultra and how they were trying to change the personality and characteristics of people. But that's a whole different subject, and we ain't even going to go there. So can we discuss your brain aneurysm and how that affected your life and what you went through with that?
Absolutely. My brain aneurysm happened back in 2016. It was actually on election day between Trump and Hillary. I think that can pretty much cause an aneurysm for anybody.
You're right.
But that day, I was excited to go vote. At the time, my husband was working as a Southern Baptist preacher, and our kids were young. Our son, I want to say, was about 8, and my daughter was 6. And so we were just a happy little family. We were living out on the farm in northern Oklahoma. And I had been previously diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder that can cause aneurysms. That said, I'd been closely monitored by my doctors, and I didn't have any reason to believe that I was at any kind of risk for vascular complications or any kind of aneurysms. I'd had multiple scans of my brain, and there had never shown anything that I should have been concerned about. So that day I woke up and my face was swollen a bit, and I sent a picture to my husband and said, hey, my face is a little bit swollen. It might be an allergic reaction just to the environment. Let me take a couple Benadryl and see if it goes down. Well, it did not. But I wasn't too concerned about it. I didn't have any kind of pain. No headache. My neck wasn't hurting, nothing like that. It was just a small amount of swelling. And so it was kind of inconsequential to me. So I went about my day, and by that afternoon, I went and sat on the couch to see if there was any kind of exit polls coming out in relation to the election. And as I did, I was looking through my phone, and then I heard this loud pop that happened in my skull. Well, my first thought was, okay, this was pretty catastrophic. It was extremely painful. I thought that I had been shot, and there had been some coyote hunters out around our area in the days leading up to this. And so I thought, well, they have got to have been out there hunting and shot through the wall, because we lived just in a little flimsy trailer house at the time. And I was pretty convinced that I had been shot in the head. But I didn't feel anything. I tried to start assessing, my nursing kicked in. So I'm like, okay, let me try to see if I can figure out what's happened here. And I kind of focused on the back of my head, and I didn't feel any kind of blood or anything. I know that's kind of graphic, but I didn't feel anything like that would point to me actually being shot. And so my next thought was, okay, this has been an aneurysm. And so I could feel almost like an electric avalanche that went from the top of my head down to my feet, just kind of a rolling manner that went over me. And it felt like I was like being peeled like an onion, like everything was being peeled away from me. It was really strange.
Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah. And so the next thing I know, I am realizing just how bad it was. I said, okay, I'm not going to survive this. This is really awful. This is catastrophic here. And so I started praying. I started thinking about my kids. And I was worried because they were due to come in any time then. And so I was begging that God would not allow them to come in and find my body. That was my main concern, was that it wouldn't be them. But then I thought, okay, well, my husband's not going to handle this well either, and it's going to be one of them that's going to find me. And so I was just kind of heartbroken. And as I was crying and I was praying, just kind of in my spirit, I started looking around, and I said, okay, I'm in complete darkness. What's going on here? I realized that I was no longer on the earth. I had completely passed away at this point. And so then I was just heartbroken that I wasn't going to get to see my family again. And I prayed a lot. I was worried about standing at judgment. I knew that anytime I was either going to be in heaven or in hell, and that I was worried. I was a born again Christian at the time. And I was still terrified. You hope that you've done enough. I know that it's not based on works according to the church, but you still, I don't know if it was necessarily a life review, but you reflect, and I think that anybody would have a hard time not being scared in that situation. And so I was kind of beside myself. I was pretty frantic during my time over there. And the next thing I know, I kind of felt like I was in a box, like I had been separated from everything. And I started realizing that like all of creation was around me. I could feel it. It was permeating everything in that area. I couldn't see anything. Nothing was there to see, but everything existed there, which is kind of a paradox, but that's how it was. I felt like I was separate within this kind of invisible box that would not allow me to be part of everything that was around me. And I was heartbroken. I was scared that I was going to be there forever. And I didn't understand why Jesus wasn't coming. I didn't understand why, my grandma wasn't showing up. I didn't understand why there was no tunnel of light. I was looking for all of these things that I was expecting, and nothing came. And that's what kind of added to me being so scared. And so the next thing, there was an entity that shows up. And I can't say that he was human. I can't say that it was Jesus. I can't say that it was an angel. I don't know. It was a male energy. I did not see him. I felt his presence there. I can't even tell you he was human, but he was there. And he kind of relayed to me telepathically, you're not going to be here forever. And so that instantly kind of calmed me.
I bet it was still traumatizing right up before that moment, though, just knowing that this could be the end. Oh, that's just got to be a sinking feeling.
Well, if you think about it, I had just lost everybody that mattered to me. They were going to be losing me, but I had lost them as well. And I was put in a place where I was isolated. I could have no comfort. And so that's what was so horrific for me, was the loss of everything, and then the separation afterwards, the lack of comfort and the lack of caring was soul crushing, until that entity arrived. He really kind of served to calm my fears, but just that, I say he sent it to me telepathically, but it was a whole feeling, like instantly whenever he said, you're not going to be here forever, that weight was lifted instantly. And I don't know if it was sent from him or if it was just within my own spirit that I felt that relief, but it was instant. And once he did, I was released from this box and I started sailing off to my left. And in the distance, I saw a purple glow. And I started going kind of towards it. And this entity, he traveled with me as I went there. I don't know if he was directing me or what, but I got closer and closer to it. And it looked like actually a map of brain neurons that were glowing bright pink. And then when they joined, they were glowing very bright yellow. And this thing just gave off immense love. And the entity told me, that's the fabric of humanity. And I was just like, wow. It seemed like it was the most important thing in all of creation, that this was like the cherished thing that I should know about that exists over there. And I said, I kind of was like, can I go towards it? And he said, no, it's not for you. And directed me back the other way, which I was kind of disappointed in. But the next thing I know, I was waking up with a jolt in my body. And I was slumped over on the couch. I completely crumpled over. And when I came to, I realized that I'd had a stroke because my arm was hanging limp and my ears were ringing so loud. I heard the TV going in the distance, but I couldn't make out anything that was being said or anything. And it was just pure panic then as I tried to find my phone and get to some kind of help. But I went to the hospital and they ran some scans. And of course, it was a small community hospital. It took us 30 minutes just to get there because we were so remote out on the farm that even just getting to the small hospital in the nearest community was a 30-mile drive. And once we got there, they kind of had old outdated equipment and they weren't really equipped to see someone with something like what I had. And so they sent me home and said that maybe my neck had shifted. They were not able to find what had happened. And so that started off about a 2-year plight where I was searching for answers. I went to multiple doctors and they kept referring back to that first ER visit. And they said, well, they did a scan and they didn't find anything. So you're having migraines. And my neurologist actually said, you're having this type of migraine called a hemiplegic migraine. And it causes stroke-like symptoms. When in reality, I was having multiple strokes and from the aneurysm trying to clot off. And I just would go and push through it, try to talk myself through the anxiety of having a stroke because they told me, don't go back to the ER, you're fine. And so it really was 2 years of just pure suffering. It was pretty horrendous. I was scared to die and go back over to the void. And I was in terrible pain trying to remain living. And so I was kind of caught in between with one foot in each world at that time. And then that resulted in the Roswell trip where I met Kathleen. And then it started on my whole journey down into ufology.
Man, that's horrifying.
Yeah, we hear some near-death experiences from others that have crossed over temporarily. I like the term temporary death experience because there's kind of a difference. Some people will have a near-death experience. They can have an out-of-body experience just from being close to death. And then there's those that have actually died, and they have spent an amount of time over in the other side, where they were temporarily dead, and they have a much more in-depth experience. But I think that there's kind of different levels to it that happen. But typically we will hear from the near-death experiencers that they've had a heaven experience. They've gone straight to heaven. They've been greeted by loved ones. They've seen a deity of some type, and they've had a wonderful experience, and they're looking forward to going back very much. It's very rare that you hear a story like mine where someone's sent to what's known as the void or sent to a hell-like experience is even more rare.
Yeah, because we have glamorized heaven and hell in our society, and it's given us a false depiction of what it could actually be.
Right. And that was what was so interesting to me was when I arrived over there, I had a whole preconceived notion. I was expecting to be greeted by Jesus. I was expected to be, gathered around by loved ones and welcome into heaven and walking the streets of gold, and none of that happened. Obviously, I was put into a place that was completely devoid of any kind of environment, which was, it almost was like a peek behind the veil. I had no kind of simulated environment that I was placed in. I was placed in the lack of. So I don't know what that means, but that's where I ended up. And it's interesting that I had a whole idea of where I thought I was going for the afterlife, and my experience of it was anything but what I was expecting.
So while you were in the void, could you see yourself? Could you see your hands and everything, or was it absolutely complete black?
No, it was completely black. In fact, whenever I first arrived there and realized and started looking around in the darkness, I had tried to look down at my hands to see if I could see them. And when I didn't, my first instinct was try to clap my hand. And that's when I realized I didn't have any kind of form. I was literally just my consciousness floating in this abyss. And I still think it's kind of funny that you end up in a whole nother place, and the first thing you want to do is clap your hands. But I was trying to identify if I had hands, and why I couldn't see them.
So did you have any, oh man, so many different questions. So the physical feeling, were you able to like physically, or was it all mentally while you were in the void? Was there any kind of balance there at all?
I did not have any more physical pain. That was one of the wonderful things of being over there. My genetic condition causes almost chronic, continuous physical pain. And it's something I've learned to live with throughout my life. I didn't have any ounce of that over there. And that was fantastic with me. But the emotion that I felt was unboxed. It was unleashed in a whole nother degree than what we experience here on Earth. Because all I was my emotion. And so everything about my being was just amplified. So my fear, my panic, my sorrow, all of that was just who I was at that moment.
During your 2 years of recuperation, what was it like with your emotions physically, the irregularities that you were going through on a daily basis?
It's really interesting. That first 2 years, I was really focused on trying to get some answers to the physical. I knew that I had had the near-death experience, but being married to a Southern Baptist preacher, I was kind of embarrassed and didn't really want him to know that I didn't make it to heaven. So I was dealing with things on several different levels. The physical, I kind of got to the point where I either wanted to be healed or I wanted to die. I couldn't live in this kind of limbo with being in such incredible pain. And like I said, being worried about going back. I just wanted it to, one way or the other, I needed to find where I needed to be and start healing or it needed to end. I was in such a state of suffering during that time. I started noticing different things were happening with me. I would have interference with kind of electrical equipment around me. I tried a couple of different microwaves. Street lights would go on and off around me. And these were things I hadn't experienced before. I also started realizing that I seemed to be a little more psychic and in touch with things that were going on. I started looking into energy manipulation and doing meditations. And these were things that I typically did not do as a Christian. I was pretty much against doing meditations, and I figured that was something that I always would stay away from. But I was very drawn to these things after returning. I also got into alternative health with trying to do Reiki and things, trying to heal myself because I was getting no help from the medical community. I literally was sent home with a brain aneurysm and told, take a Tylenol. So that was really the only thing that I could turn to was the alternative health and things that I could do within my own power. And slowly but surely, I started recovering. I ended up finding a good doctor. We moved to Oklahoma City and found a good doctor that finally listened. And she sent me for the proper tests. And within a week, I had answers that they had found 2 large rips in my vertebral artery. The actual medical term for what I had was a vertebral artery dissection. And typically that ends in death. It's very hard to survive those. I had 2 big chunks torn out of that artery, and they had healed on their own during the course of that 2 years, doing whatever I had been doing as far as energy healing and the meditations and focusing on trying to get my body to heal itself. And it was interesting. Once I started talking about my near-death experience, I shared it with my husband. And we joined IANS, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And they have online sharing groups. And so I signed up for one of those. And in talking with others, I started learning that these were common after effects to near-death experiencers, were these, the energy work and being drawn to meditation and electrical interferences and some of the different things that I had been seeing and witnessing and noticing in my own life. Were things that others were being reported to. One of the main things that changed with me was I lost any kind of interest in religion. I lost any kind of interest in sports. And being here in Oklahoma, of course, I always used to cheer for my Sooners, and I'd be at church every Sunday, and that was no longer me. I had a hard time going to church and hearing a man who had never been there talk about things that he's learning from a holy book. I had a whole different view of it. And I held room for many other religions afterwards and the truth that can be found in many of the world's beautiful teachings.
And I bet that was hard to sit down with your husband, him being a preacher, and saying that to him.
Absolutely. It was. That was probably one of the hardest things I've done, was share that, because I knew it was either going to go well or it wasn't. But luckily, I married an incredible man that is very open-minded and said, okay, let's learn about this together. I've since learned that most people that experience a near-death experience, 80% of marriages end after a near-death experience. And we were able to work through it. He, bless his heart, he sat through all the meetings with me and read all the books with me and trying to learn. And one of the interesting things as I was learning more and more about the near-death experience side of things, I started realizing that there was some overlap between the near-death experience community and the UFO community. And so once I was starting to get really well, and I had, gone through MUFON and become a field investigator, and I'd been talking to people, and my health had stabilized, I started really looking into this connection. And I found that Dr. Kenneth Green had done a study back in the 60s or 70s, I believe. No, I might be lying to you. He did a previous study out of the University of Connecticut, comparing near-death experiencers and UFO experiencers. And he identified a couple of different things that were really important. One, there's an encounter-prone personality of people that tend to experience these kind of encounters, whether they be UFO encounters, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, because there were people in his previous study of near-death experiencers that died and they did not have a near-death experience. They died, they got resuscitated, they had nothing to report from the other side. And then you had these people that were coming back and were able to say, hey, I had this whole different thing that happened over there, and that's the real reality. This is nothing compared to what you're going to experience over on the other side. And so what differentiated these people was the encounter-prone personality. And then the other thing was the after effects. And we see common after effects between UFO experiencers and near-death experiencers. The UFO experiencers, they're changed very much the same way. And they are coming back saying things like, we've got to take care of ourselves. We've got to take care of each other. We've got to take care of our Earth. We've got to quit with this warlike mentality. And it's the same thing that we're getting from near-death experiencers, that, hey, we've got to learn to love each other. We've got to get along. We've got to quit, messing up our Earth. We've got to take care of what we have here. And so it's interesting that we're getting these same messages from these two seemingly different phenomena, and that there's a whole lot of overlap there.
So, Mindy, where can everybody find MUFON on social media, online, all that stuff?
Well, they can visit the national site at www.mufon.com. That's MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And they can sign up to become a member of MUFON through that. They can also report a UFO sighting or an encounter through there. And there's a big button that says report a UFO, and that will take you to one of 3 different outlets where you can report the UFO, report an entity, or report an abduction. There's also our experiencer resource team that's available anytime through the MUFON website. They ask that you go on and fill out the experiencer questionnaire, and that will trigger a member of our experiencer resource team to contact the individual if they want to be contacted. And that's more for people that have ongoing encounters. They have memories of being abducted as a child and they're still encountering it, and they just want to speak to someone that understands and can possibly point them in the direction of professionals as far as support groups or even hypnotists. That's the way to get that going, is through the questionnaire for the experiencer resource team. As far as Oklahoma, they can go on our website at mufonok.org, and they can sign up for our monthly meetings that we have. Right now we're meeting via Zoom, but we're looking to move over to in-person meetings sometime this summer. And right now they can sign up for the Zoom meeting, and we'll email them a link about a week beforehand, and they can join us there. And also on our Facebook page, which is Oklahoma MUFON, and constantly posting new reports that are coming out, or news stories, or anything of interest within the field of ufology. So that's a great way to keep up to date with us.
That's amazing. That's awesome. It's so crazy how it's such a wide network of people just working together, trying to get all the evidence they can and trying to research it and help other people out. That's just great. And I'm so glad that you're here today and able to tell us our story. And thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the podcast and talking with me. And you're always welcome back. And I will make sure that you always have a time slot.
Thank you, Jonah. I always have a great time talking with you, and I'm looking forward to the next time.
Oh, yeah. You always bring something new to tell me and just blow my mind away. Well, that's all the time we have for today. You can find me on Facebook at the Blue Collar Enlightenment Show, Twitter at the BCE Show. Follow me and send me your thoughts on the podcast. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Later.